She asked me a question I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know the words, but because the answer revealed a wound so deep I'd spent 63 years running from it. The alien queen, with eyes that held galaxies and a voice like distant thunder felt directly in my chest, looked at David Chen and asked, "Why do humans fight what they adore?" And in that moment, everything I thought I understood about love, about my failed marriage, about my empty life crumbled like sand through desperate fingers. David Chen, 63 years old, a retired art professor living alone in a desert house outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, sat on his studio floor at 2:17 in the morning, staring at a blank canvas that had been blank for 547 days. The number was specific because he'd counted. Every single day since Elizabeth died. Every single day since the last words she'd said to him in that hospice room. Her hand cold in his, her breath shallow, her eyes still sharp with the question that had haunted their entire relationship. "I never stopped loving you, David," she'd whispered, her voice paper-thin but clear. "But you never let me in. Why? Why do we fight what we adore?" And David, holding the hand of the woman he'd loved for 40 years, married for 25, divorced from for 13, had no answer. Just tears. Silent, useless tears that changed nothing, explained nothing, healed nothing. Now, 18 months later, the question remained. Haunting him. Waking him. Following him through his days like a shadow he couldn't outrun. And tonight, like the 23 nights before it, he'd had the dream. Elizabeth sitting on the edge of his bed, her hand reaching toward his face, her voice clear as if she'd never died. "David, wake up. You're still sleeping. Wake up before it's too late." And he'd woken, sweating, heart racing. The room empty but her presence lingering like perfume in still air. The scent of lavender and vanilla. Her scent. Impossible, because no one in his house wore that perfume. Impossible, because she was dead. But unmistakable. So he'd come to his studio, as he had every night for weeks, to the blank canvas that mocked him with its emptiness. A professional artist who hadn't created anything in 18 months. An art professor who'd spent 35 years teaching others to express what they felt, now unable to feel anything except the hollow ache of everything he'd lost because he'd been too afraid to hold it properly. "What's wrong with me?" he whispered to the empty room, to the blank canvas, to whatever force in the universe might be listening. "I loved her. I loved my daughter. I loved my art. I loved truth and beauty and freedom. So why did I destroy it all? Why did I fight the only things that ever mattered?" The air changed. Not temperature. Not sound. Something deeper. Pressure. Density. As if the space itself had taken a breath and held it, waiting. David felt it before he saw it. A presence. Not threatening, but absolute. Like standing before an ocean and knowing, without needing to be told, that you are small and the water is vast and the rules you've lived by on land don't apply here. He stood slowly, his 63-year-old knees protesting, and walked to the window. The desert stretched out before him, silver blue under a 3/4 moon, mountains dark silhouettes against a sky dense with stars. And there, 200 meters from his house, hovering 3 meters above the sand, was light. Not a light. Light itself. Violet gold, pulsating with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat, growing brighter, larger, more solid with each pulse until it wasn't light anymore but a sphere. Approximately 10 meters in diameter, its surface like molten opal, reflecting colors that had no names in any language David knew. His hands trembled. His breath caught. But his feet moved. Not away, toward the door, down the wooden steps of his porch, across the cool sand in bare feet, walking towards something impossible with the certainty of a man who'd been waiting his entire life for exactly this. The sphere descended silently onto the desert floor. Sand didn't even scatter beneath it, as if the object had no weight, no mass, existed in a different relationship with gravity than everything else. And as David approached to within 10 meters, an opening formed. Not a door sliding or hinging, but a dissolution of boundary, solid becoming permeable, and something emerged. She was tall, 2.5 meters at least, humanoid in form but unmistakably other. Her skin, if it could be called skin, was opalescent, shifting between violet and gold with her subtle movements, translucent enough that David could see light moving beneath the surface like bioluminescence in deep ocean creatures. Her form was clearly feminine, elegant, powerful in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with presence. But it was her eyes that stopped David's breath completely. Enormous, occupying half her face, with no visible white, only depth. And within that depth, David saw not a reflection of himself but something else. Nebulae, galaxies, star clusters. As if her eyes were not organs for seeing but windows into the cosmos itself, containing multitudes, eternities, impossible vastness compressed into a gaze that now focused completely on him. And when she spoke, it wasn't sound. It was impression, transmitted directly into his mind, but felt in his chest, not his head. A resonance that bypassed language and went straight to understanding. David Chen, 63 years old. Retired art professor. Widower of 18 months. Divorced 13 years before that. Father to Maya, 38. With whom you haven't had a genuine conversation in 11 years. Artist who hasn't created in 547 days. Man who's been asking the same question every night for 23 nights. I came because you're finally ready to hear the answer. David's voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. Who are you? I am Azuriel. What your species would call a queen, though we have no hierarchy as you understand it. I am the eldest consciousness of my collective, observer of younger species, and currently, deeply concerned about yours. Concerned. David's pragmatic mind, the part shaped by decades in academia, tried to assert itself. Why would you be concerned about humans? Azuriel's energy shifted, something that might have been sadness if beings made of light could feel such things. Because I've been observing your species for 50,000 of your years, David. And in all that time, I've never seen a pattern as destructive as the one currently accelerating. A pattern that, if not reversed by 2030, will make your self-destruction inevitable. And you, specifically, embody that pattern perfectly. Which is precisely why contact with you became necessary. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. What pattern? Azuriel moved closer, her movement more glide than walk, and David realized he wasn't afraid. Overwhelmed? Yes. Confused? Absolutely. But not afraid. Because something in him, some part deeper than conscious thought, recognized this. Had been waiting for this. The pattern, Azuriel transmitted, her presence now only 2 meters away, of fighting what you adore, destroying what you love, sabotaging what you treasure, running from what you seek, and doing it so consistently, so thoroughly, that you've convinced yourself this is normal, that this is simply how life works, that loss is inevitable and connection is temporary and everything beautiful must eventually be destroyed. David felt tears welling up, hot against the cool desert air. I don't understand. I know. That's why I came. To help you understand. To show you the mechanism. To reveal why humans engage in this pattern and what it's actually costing you, both individually and as a species. Azuriel gestured toward the sphere behind her. Inside, I can expand your perception. Show you things your normal consciousness can't process. Help you see the pattern you've been living, the wound driving it, and most importantly, the path to healing it. Will you come? David looked at his house behind him, 40 years of accumulated life, safe and small and empty. Then at the impossible sphere before him, promising answers to questions he'd carried for 6 decades. If I come with you, will I understand? Will I know why I destroyed my marriage? Why I pushed my daughter away? Why I can't create anymore? Why everything I loved, I also fought? Yes, Azuriel transmitted, and the word carried absolute certainty. Not just intellectually, viscerally. You'll understand not just the what, but the why and the how. And more importantly, you'll understand that you're not broken. You're wounded. And wounds, when properly understood, can heal. David Chen, retired art professor, pragmatic academic, rational man of science, took a breath and made a choice that would change everything. Show me. The interior of the sphere defied every law of physics David had ever taught. The space was vast, impossible, easily 50 meters across despite the exterior being only 10. The walls, if they could be called walls, were organic, crystalline, pulsating with soft light that seemed alive, breathing. The floor beneath his bare feet was warm, yielding slightly, like walking on living membrane. And at the center of the space was something that made David's artist soul sing with recognition even as his rational mind recoiled. A sphere of flowing imagery. Not a screen, not a projection, but three-dimensional, multidimensional, showing simultaneous timelines, perspectives, realities, all flowing like water through water, distinct but interpenetrating. Sit, Azuriel transmitted gently, and a structure emerged from the floor, molding itself to David's body perfectly, supporting him in comfort he hadn't felt since before the arthritis in his lower back had started years ago. Azuriel remained standing, or hovering. David couldn't quite tell. Her presence filled the space without dominating it, like a sun that gave light without burning. David Chen, she began, and her voice in his mind felt different now. Deeper, more intimate. Before I show you the pattern that's destroying your species, I need you to understand one crucial thing. You are not unique. You're not especially flawed. You're not unusually broken. In fact, you are heartbreakingly normal. Which is precisely the problem. David felt a strange relief in that. Not unique. Not especially broken. Just normal. The pattern you embody, the fighting of what you adore, is currently operating in approximately 73% of your species. And that percentage is rising. Which means humanity is reaching a critical threshold where self-destruction becomes not just possible but probable. The flowing sphere at the center began to shift, images forming, and David saw Earth from space. Beautiful. Blue-green jewel against velvet black. But as he watched, a web of light became visible around the planet. Like a neural network, billions of nodes of consciousness connected by threads of luminous energy. This is how I see your species, Azuriel narrated. Each point of light is an individual human consciousness. The threads connecting them are relationships, energetic exchanges, frequencies shared. And observe what's happening. David watched as approximately 3/4 of the threads began to twist, tangle, darken. Beautiful flowing connections becoming knotted, restricted, struggling against themselves. These darkened threads, as Uriel explained, represent the fighting pattern. Humans loving something, then immediately creating distance, control, judgment, sabotage. And watch what happens when enough threads tangle. The vision zoomed to specific clusters. David saw relationships forming, glowing brightly with love, then quickly dimming as fighting patterns activated. He saw connections to nature form, then be severed through destruction. He saw internal connections, humans loving their own authentic selves, then rejecting, hiding, suppressing that very authenticity. This is not natural state, David. When I first observed your species 50,000 years ago, before the programming took hold, over 90% of these threads flowed freely. Humans adored and embodied simultaneously. There was no gap between loving something and being it. No separation between appreciating beauty and expressing beauty. They were integrated. Whole. What happened? David asked, unable to look away from the tangled web. Control systems, Azuriel transmitted, sadness permeating the words. Approximately 12,000 years ago, certain humans discovered that a fearful, separated population is easier to control than an integrated, empowered one. So gradually, through religion, through social conditioning, through education systems, through parenting patterns passed generation to generation, they introduced a virus into human consciousness. The vision shifted, showing the propagation of an idea through time. David watched it spread like actual contagion through the web of consciousness, flowing from parents to children, teachers to students, priests to congregations. The virus, as Uriel continued, was a single belief: you are fundamentally unworthy. Not worthy of unconditional love. Not worthy of freedom. Not worthy of truth. Not worthy of your own divinity. Not worthy of what you adore. And once that belief took root, everything else followed automatically. David felt a chill despite the warmth of the space. Automatically? How? Because unworthiness creates a frequency mismatch, David. This is where the science comes in, beyond metaphor. Everything in existence vibrates at specific frequencies. Stone vibrates slowly, plants faster, animals faster still. And humans, when operating at full potential, vibrate at what we call the love frequency. Approximately 528 Hz, if you need a number. The vision showed a human figure glowing with steady, beautiful oscillation, waves of light emanating in perfect rhythm. This was your natural state. Love not as an emotion you sometimes feel toward specific people, but as a base frequency you constantly emanate. A state of being. Like breathing. Involuntary. Constant. Effortless. But when the unworthiness belief was introduced, it created density. Blockages. Disruptions to the natural frequency. Observe. The glowing human figure developed dark spots, areas where the light couldn't penetrate, where the oscillation became irregular, chaotic. And David recognized the exact locations of those spots because he felt them in his own body. Solar plexus. Throat. Heart especially. All the places he'd carried tension, pain, blockage for decades. These dense areas, as Uriel explained, vibrate at much lower frequencies. Fear vibrates around 100 Hz. Shame around 20. Guilt around 30. And when your base frequency drops from 528 to, say, 150, something very specific happens when you encounter anything operating at the higher frequency. She paused, letting David process. What happens? He asked, though some part of him already knew. Cognitive dissonance. Frequency mismatch. It becomes excruciating to maintain proximity to what you adore because the vibrational gap is too wide. Like trying to match a deep bass note with a high soprano. The dissonance creates actual physical, emotional, psychological pain. The vision showed it clearly now. A low-frequency human encountering high-frequency love, beauty, truth, authenticity. And the meeting point creating visible disruption, chaos, pain. So you have three options, as Uriel transmitted. Option 1. Raise your frequency to match what you adore. But this requires dissolving the unworthiness belief, which feels like death to the ego structure built around it. Option 2. Reject what you adore, create distance, push it away to escape the painful frequency mismatch. Option 3. Try to lower the frequency of what you adore, pull it down to your level through criticism, control, dependency. David's chest tightened with recognition. I did options 2 and 3. With Elizabeth. With everything. Yes. Because you were never taught option 1 existed. The control systems needed you to remain at low frequency. Dependent. Controllable. So they taught you that high frequency was only accessible to special people. Saints. Saviors. Those chosen by external God. Not available to ordinary humans through internal work. The vision shifted again, and David saw his own life. Not as memory but as energy pattern. He saw himself as a child, glowing brightly, natural frequency intact. Then his parents, Chinese immigrants, first generation, terrified of anything that seemed unsafe, unpredictable. His father saying, "Art is beautiful, David, but you need security. You need to be practical." Loving David but fearing his wildness, his creative nature, his authentic expression. And David watching his own frequency begin to drop. Not from his parents' malice, but from their fear transmitted through every interaction. The belief instilling itself, who I naturally am is not acceptable. I must suppress my authentic self to be loved. Therefore, I am not worthy as I am. You were 7 years old, as Uriel narrated gently, when you first learned to fight what you adored. You adored your own creative nature. Your wild, untamed, authentic self. And you fought it to gain approval. Suppressed it. Controlled it. Eventually forgot it entirely. David saw it play forward. Teenage years, choosing practical electives over art. College, studying business first before finally, at 22, allowing himself to pursue art, but only academically, safely, within controlled institutional structures. Never truly wild. Never completely free. Always held back by the belief, my authentic nature is not worthy. I must earn worthiness through achievement, compliance, acceptable expression. And then you met Elizabeth, Azuriel continued, and the vision showed her. Age 26, David 28, at a gallery opening in San Francisco. She was everything he'd suppressed in himself. Wild, free, authentic, unapologetically herself. Creating installations that were raw, emotional, honest in ways that terrified him because he recognized it was what he'd buried. You adored her immediately, Azuriel transmitted, and David watched his younger self falling in love at first sight. But even in that moment, even in that first conversation, he could see the pattern beginning. The fear underneath the adoration. The voice in his head, she's too much, too bright, too free. I'll never be able to keep her. And there, Azuriel said, and David felt the weight of recognition crushing his chest. There was the seed of everything that followed. You didn't adore her as an equal, recognizing shared divine nature. You worshipped her as something you could never be. You placed her on a pedestal, made her a goddess, made yourself unworthy. And that structure, that subject-object split between worshipper and worshipped, guaranteed the failure of everything that followed. The vision showed their marriage. Beautiful moments, yes. The wedding, both of them laughing, tears of joy. Maya's birth, Elizabeth exhausted but radiant, holding their daughter like she held the universe itself. Quiet mornings on the deck of their Oakland apartment, coffee, conversation, connection. But underneath every beautiful moment, David could now see what he'd never recognized at the time. His frequency, operating at maybe 200 Hz. Elizabeth's, natural and free, operating at 500, 520, sometimes spiking to full 528 when she was creating, when she was being most herself. And the gap creating pain he'd interpreted as something else entirely. When she loved you unconditionally, as Uriel explained, when she operated in that high frequency of pure acceptance, your system felt it as threat. Because unconditional love highlights conditional self-worth. Her freedom reflected your internal prison. Her authenticity exposed your masks. And instead of seeing it as invitation to join her at that frequency, you experienced it as evidence of your unworthiness. So you began to fight, as Uriel continued, and David watched it unfold with sickening clarity. Subtle at first. Where were you? Who were you with? Why didn't you tell me? Control disguised as caring. Criticism disguised as helpful feedback. Slowly, consistently, creating distance to escape the painful frequency mismatch. And Elizabeth, who loved you, tried to meet you halfway, as Uriel narrated, and David saw it. Elizabeth dimming her own light, creating less freely, spending more time on his career than her own. Slowly, gradually, lowering her frequency to make proximity more bearable for him. Until she couldn't anymore, David whispered, tears streaming now. Until it was killing her. Yes, 25 years of slowly suffocating her own light to accommodate your inability to rise to meet it. And finally, at 53 years old, she chose herself. Not because she stopped loving you, because she loved herself enough to stop destroying herself for your comfort. The vision showed the final fight. David remembered every word. Elizabeth saying, I can't breathe in this marriage anymore, David. I've spent 25 years making myself smaller, quieter, less. And I'm dying. Not physically, but the part of me that makes me me is dying. And I can't do it anymore. And David's response, exactly as he'd said it, I've given you everything. A home, security, support for your career. What more do you want? And Elizabeth, with tears streaming, saying the words that still echoed, I want you to stop fighting who I am. I want you to stop needing me to be smaller so you feel safe. I want you to meet me at my frequency instead of demanding I descend to yours. But you can't. Or won't. I'm not sure which. And I can't wait anymore to find out. You thought she was leaving you, Azuriel transmitted gently. But she was saving herself from the slow death of frequency suppression. And you, David, were fighting what you adored. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but absolutely, completely, with every attempt to control, every subtle criticism, every unspoken demand that she be less so you could feel more. David couldn't speak, could only weep, decades of confusion crystallizing into painful clarity. And Maya, Azuriel continued, and the vision shifted to his daughter. Your beautiful daughter who inherited Elizabeth's natural high frequency. Her authentic, creative, wild nature. And what did you do? David saw himself as a father, loving Maya desperately, adoring her, and simultaneously fighting her. Don't climb so high. Don't talk so loud. Don't be so wild. Be careful. Be safe. Be acceptable. Every instruction an attempt to control what he feared losing. Every correction a diminishment of what he actually adored. By the time she was 18, Azuriel said, she'd learned the same pattern you learned from your parents. Who I naturally am is not acceptable. I must suppress myself to be loved. And now she's 38, living across the country, speaking to you maybe 4 times a year, polite but distant. Not because she doesn't love you, because proximity to you requires suppressing herself. And she learned from her mother's example that suppressing yourself for someone else's comfort, even someone you love, is slow death. David was sobbing now, not quietly but with the full body release of 63 years of accumulated pain finally finding exit. I destroyed them both. I destroyed everything I loved. No, Azuriel transmitted firmly. You fought them because you'd been programmed to believe you weren't worthy of them. There's a crucial difference. Destruction implies intentional harm. Fighting implies resistance to something that feels threatening. And high-frequency love, when you're operating at low frequency, feels like the greatest threat of all. Because it demands you either rise to meet it or admit you're choosing not to. She paused, letting that settle. And admitting you're choosing not to requires confronting the wound. The belief in unworthiness. The programmed conviction that you're fundamentally flawed. Which feels like death. So instead, you fought. Automatically. Unconsciously. Following patterns laid down in childhood, reinforced through culture, normalized by a society where 73% are doing the same thing. So I'm not uniquely terrible, David said, voice raw. Just normally terrible. You're wounded, Azuriel corrected. And wounds, when unexamined, create predictable patterns. You're not terrible. You're human. Operating exactly as your programming designed. Which is why healing requires not moral reformation but conscious deprogramming. David looked up at her, this impossible being of light who somehow understood him more deeply in 1 hour than he'd understood himself in 6 decades. Can it be healed? At 63, after a lifetime of this pattern, can it actually change? Yes, Azuriel transmitted, and the word carried absolute certainty. Not instantly, not without work, but genuinely, completely, if you're willing to do what most humans refuse. Face the wound. Feel it fully. Dissolve the unworthiness belief through direct experience of your actual worthiness. And learn to embody what you've only known how to adore from a distance. She moved closer, and David felt her energy, gentle but powerful, like standing in sunlight after years in shade. But first, you need to understand something that will sound paradoxical. Something most humans never realize. Are you ready? David nodded, not trusting his voice. The problem isn't that you fight what you adore. The problem is the adoration itself. Adoration is the wound, David. Adoration is what creates the fighting. David's confusion must have shown because Azuriel immediately clarified. Adoration is not love. Adoration is worship. And worship requires separation. Think about it. What does adoration mean? David thought. Admiration? Placing something on a pedestal? Seeing something as special, valuable, precious? Yes. And where is the person who adores in that equation? Below. Looking up. separate from what they adore. Exactly. Adoration creates subject and object, worshipper and worshipped, lower and higher, unworthy and worthy. And that separation, that vertical hierarchy, makes true intimacy impossible. Because intimacy requires equals, requires recognition of shared essence. Not different levels of worth but different expressions of the same fundamental divinity. The vision showed it. Two human figures. One kneeling, looking up, hands raised in worship toward the other, who stood higher, separate, unreachable. Then the image shifted. Same two figures, standing together, equal height, facing each other, energy flowing between them without hierarchy, without separation. This, as Uriel indicated the second image, is love as state, not worship. Recognition, not adoration. Equals communing in shared frequency. And this is what humans had 50,000 years ago before the programming. Before the unworthiness virus created the gap. So when I adored Elizabeth, David said slowly, I was actually creating the problem that destroyed us. Yes. When you placed her on a pedestal, you made her other. Made her goddess while making yourself merely human. And that structure cannot sustain intimacy. Because intimacy requires vulnerability, which requires equality, which requires recognizing that what you see in her that you call divine is simply the reflection of the divine nature in yourself that you've forgotten. David felt something shift in his chest. Not understanding yet, but recognition. A knowing deeper than thought. Everything you adored in Elizabeth, as Uriel continued, her freedom, her authenticity, her creative power, her wild untamed self, her capacity for unconditional love, you possessed equally. You simply buried it, suppressed it, forgot it. And when you saw it in her, instead of recognizing, oh, this is what I am beneath my programming, you worshipped it as something you could never be. Other. Separate. Higher. And the same with your art, she said, and the vision showed younger David in galleries, museums, standing before paintings that moved him to tears. You adored great art, worshipped it, placed the artists on pedestals, never recognizing that the creative force that flowed through them flows through you equally. You just never gave yourself permission to access it because you believed you weren't worthy. David saw it now. Every act of worship was simultaneously an act of self-diminishment. Every time he'd said, that's so beautiful, I could never create that, he was actually saying I am separate from the creative force. I am unworthy of expressing divinity. The universe doesn't create hierarchies of worth, as Uriel transmitted. The same intelligence that made galaxies beats your heart. The same creative force that painted your precious sunsets flows through your hands when you allow it. But allowing it requires releasing the worship, releasing the adoration, and stepping into embodiment. Embodiment? David asked. Becoming what you adore instead of worshipping it from a distance. When you see freedom in another, instead of adoring them for it, asking where have I imprisoned myself, and choosing freedom. When you see authenticity, instead of placing them on a pedestal, asking where am I wearing masks, and choosing genuine expression. When you see creative power, instead of worshipping the creator, recognizing I am creative force and creating. The vision showed a human figure transforming, starting in worship position, kneeling, looking up, then slowly standing, rising, until standing equal with what had been worshipped. Then a remarkable thing happened. The two figures merged, became one, glowing with twice the light. This is the path, as Uriel said. From adoration to embodiment. From worship to recognition. From separation to union. Not achieving something external. Remembering something internal. Reclaiming what was never actually lost, just forgotten. David sat in silence, feeling the weight and the simplicity of it simultaneously. So my entire life, he finally said, the fighting wasn't the disease. The adoration was. And the fighting was just symptom. Yes. You adored Elizabeth instead of embodying the same qualities. You adored great art instead of creating it. You adored freedom instead of living it. You adored your authentic nature instead of being it. And adoration, by its very structure, maintains the gap that generates the fighting. Why did no one ever tell me this? David asked, feeling something like anger rising beneath the grief. Because the control systems benefit from worship. A population that worships external saviors, external gods, external authority never claims their own power. A population that adores freedom but doesn't embody it remains controllable. A population that worships great leaders but doesn't recognize their own leadership capacity remains dependent. Adoration is perfect for control. Embodiment is dangerous to every system built on hierarchy. The vision expanded again, showing human history. Religions teaching worship God, don't become God. Education teaching admire geniuses, don't recognize your own genius. Society teaching respect authority, don't claim your own authority. Every system perpetuating the same message. You are separate from what is great, worthy, divine, powerful. Worship it. Never embody it. And when someone did embody it, Azuriel showed specific examples. When someone operated at full frequency, accessing their divine creative power directly, what happened? David saw it. Jesus, crucified. Joan of Arc, burned. Countless mystics, artists, teachers, healers throughout history who'd accessed high frequency and been destroyed by systems threatened by that embodiment. Not always violent elimination, Azuriel clarified. Sometimes co-option. Take the threat, sanitize it, turn it into worship object that maintains separation. Jesus taught these things I do, you can do, and greater. The church changed it to only Jesus can. You just worship. The message of embodiment twisted into doctrine of worship. David felt rage and grief mixing. So humanity has been sabotaged. Programmed to fight what we love. Taught to worship instead of embody. Kept at low frequency deliberately. Yes, but, and here Azuriel's energy softened, programming can be undone. Wounds can heal. Frequency can be raised. Not through more worship, not through more adoration, but through conscious practice of embodiment. And that's why I came. Not to save you, but to show you that you can save yourself. To provide the understanding and tools that were withheld. To reveal the path from worship to embodiment. She paused, and David felt the weight of what was coming. But I need you to understand the stakes. This isn't just about your personal healing, though that matters. Humanity is at a threshold. The 73% operating in fighting patterns is accelerating toward 85%. And if 85% is reached by 2030, self-destruction becomes not just probable but inevitable. Not from nuclear war or climate catastrophe, though those are symptoms, but from collective frequency dropping below the point where love is accessible at all. The vision showed it. Earth's web of consciousness, more and more threads tangling, darkening, cutting off, until a tipping point where the whole system collapsed into chaos, separation, conflict so total that cooperation became impossible. You've seen it beginning, Azuriel said. Political polarization so intense families are severing. Environmental destruction accelerating despite knowing consequences. Loneliness epidemic despite connection technology. Mental health crisis despite medical advancement. All symptoms of the same root cause, collective frequency collapse from sustained worship of what should be embodied. David felt the enormity of it. And you need 15% operating differently to reverse it. Yes, 15% embodying instead of worshipping. Creating instead of consuming. Being love instead of seeking love. Living freedom instead of demanding freedom. That 15% creates morphogenetic field strong enough to pull the remaining 85% upward. Not forcibly. Through resonance. Through example. Through possibility made visible. And me? David asked. What's my role? Ordinary embodiment, Azuriel transmitted. You're not meant to be a teacher or guru or leader. You're meant to be an ordinary human learning to embody what you've only known to worship. And when ordinary people transform, it proves transformation is universally accessible, not reserved for the special few. Your ordinariness is your gift. Your 63 years of fighting patterns make you relatable. Your willingness to face the wound and heal it makes you dangerous to the systems that require wounded humans to function. David absorbed that. Not grandiose. Not special. Just ordinary. But ordinary done with consciousness. Now, as Uriel said, and her energy shifted, it's time for direct experience. Because understanding intellectually doesn't create embodiment. You need to feel what I'm describing. 3 seconds of the state Elizabeth carried naturally. 3 seconds of operating at full frequency. Not as achievement. As remembering. Ready. David didn't feel ready. But he nodded anyway. As Uriel moved directly in front of him and placed her hand, or what served as hand, on his chest over his heart. And energy flooded his system. Not external energy being added, but David's own energy being revealed. Like layers of density dissolving, blockages clearing, the natural frequency beneath suddenly accessible. And for 3 eternal seconds, David Chen felt what Elizabeth had tried to share with him for 25 years. Love, not as emotion directed at specific person, but as state of being. As the fabric of existence itself. No separation between self and universe. No gap between lover and loved. Just love loving itself through infinite forms. He felt worthiness not as something earned but as inherent to existence itself. The fact of being alive equaling the fact of being worthy. No question. No doubt. Just is. He felt his authentic nature, the wild creative force he'd suppressed at age 7, still alive beneath decades of programming. Not dead. Not lost. Just buried. Waiting. He felt Elizabeth, not as memory or ghost, but as frequency. Still present. Still loving. The separation between them revealed as complete fiction. Form changed, but love continuous. And most devastating of all, he realized he'd always been this. The wound didn't change essence, just obscured it. Like clouds hiding sun. Sun still shining. Just blocked from view. And then it was over. The 3 seconds collapsing back into normal awareness. David in the chair, as Uriel's hand withdrawn, his face wet with tears he didn't remember starting. That, as Uriel transmitted gently, is your natural state. Not achieved through decades of meditation or special grace from external God. Just remembered. Accessed when blockages clear. And available to you every moment you choose embodiment over worship. David couldn't speak. Could only weep with a mixture of grief and relief so profound it had no name. Grief for the decades spent fighting this. Relief that it was real, accessible, possible. That's what I fought, he finally whispered. That's what I was afraid of. Yes, because embodying that requires ego death. Requires releasing every belief structure built around unworthiness. Requires admitting you rejected your own divine nature and choosing to reclaim it. And death, even death of false self, feels like death. But I'm not dead, David said. No. You're more alive than you've been in 56 years. Since age 7 when you first suppressed authentic self. And now you know what's possible. Now you have the experience to anchor your practice. Because practice is how you make that state not a 3-second anomaly but a sustainable baseline. Practice? David asked. Yes. 5 shifts, practice daily, to move from adoration to embodiment. From worship to recognition. From fighting to flowing. Not instant transformation. Gradual reconditioning. But effective if sustained. And as Uriel began to teach. The first practice, as Uriel transmitted, and the flowing sphere at the center shifted to show visual demonstration, is the practice of recognition instead of worship. Every time you encounter something that triggers adoration, you must pause and transform the impulse. The vision showed David standing before a painting that moved him, that old familiar impulse to worship rising. Then the pause. The conscious intervention. Instead of saying this is so beautiful, I could never create such beauty, you ask 3 questions. First, what quality in this am I recognizing? Name it precisely. Beauty? Truth? Freedom? Courage? Raw emotional honesty? Name it. David watched his vision self examining the painting more deeply, recognizing, Raw emotional vulnerability translated into visual form. Second question. Where have I rejected this quality in myself? Not where do I lack it. Where have I actively rejected, suppressed, controlled, or denied it? Because what you adore outside is always what you've disowned inside. Vision David sat with that, recognizing he'd rejected emotional vulnerability his entire life. Called it weakness. Suppressed it. Built walls against it. Especially after his parents' subtle shaming of emotional expression. Chen men don't cry. Chen men are strong. Third question. How can I embody this quality today? Not someday when you're worthy. Today. Small action. Concrete. Specific. Vision David considered. Embodying emotional vulnerability today could mean calling Maya and speaking honestly instead of politely. Creating one piece of art from genuine feeling instead of from technique. Writing in his journal without self-editing. And then, as Uriel continued, you choose one action and do it. Not perfectly. Just genuinely. And in that moment of embodiment, the adoration transforms to recognition. You stop worshipping the quality outside and start expressing the quality inside. The gap collapses. Subject and object merge. Every single day, she emphasized, you will encounter things that trigger worship. Art, nature, people operating at high frequency. And every single time, you practice this. Recognition. What quality? Where have I rejected it? How do I embody it today? Until it becomes automatic. Until you can't worship anymore because you've trained yourself to recognize and embody instead. David felt the simplicity and difficulty of it simultaneously. Simple in concept. Difficult because decades of programming screamed to worship, to place on pedestal, to maintain separation. How long until it feels natural? He asked. Approximately 90 days of consistent practice before the neural pathway strengthens enough to compete with old pattern. 6 months before it becomes dominant response. 1 year before it's integrated deeply enough that backsliding is rare. As Uriel showed the timeline visually. Day 1 to 30, the recognition practice feeling forced, awkward, fighting against massive resistance. Day 30 to 90, becoming slightly more natural, glimpses of genuine shift. Day 90 to 180, the new pattern strengthening, old pattern weakening. Day 180 to 365, embodiment becoming default more often than worship. The second practice, as Uriel continued, addresses the unworthiness wound directly. Because even as you practice recognition, the underlying belief I am not worthy will sabotage everything unless dissolved. The vision showed David's heart center, surrounded by dense layers of dark energy. Decades of accumulated unworthiness belief, compressed into energetic armor protecting him from feeling the wound fully. 20 minutes daily. Morning, before the day's programming activates. Sit comfortably. Hand on heart. Breathe. 5 seconds in through your heart. 5 seconds out through your heart. Constant rhythm. Creating coherence. David watched the vision demonstrate. Breath creating coherence in the chaotic electrical patterns of the heart. Gradually, with sustained practice, the heart's electromagnetic field strengthening, expanding. And as you breathe, you repeat, not as affirmation to convince yourself, but as deprogramming code, I am worthy because I am. Not because of achievement. Not because of goodness. Not because of external validation. Because existence itself is worthiness. I am. Therefore I am worthy. The mind will argue, as Uriel said, and the vision showed it. Thoughts arising, that's not true. You failed Elizabeth. You pushed Maya away. You haven't created anything valuable. You're ordinary. You're flawed. The litany of unworthiness, loud and insistent. Let the thoughts arise. Don't fight them. Don't believe them. Just notice, these are old programs running. And return attention to breath, to heart, to the statement, I am worthy because I am. The body holds the wound more deeply than the mind, as Uriel explained. So the work is somatic, not intellectual. You're not trying to convince your mind. You're allowing your nervous system to integrate a new baseline. And nervous system change requires repetition, consistency, time. Minimum 90 days before noticeable shift. But the shift is real. Cellular. Foundational. Third practice, as Uriel continued, and the energy in the space shifted, became heavier, more challenging. The practice of staying when every cell screams run. The practice of intimacy instead of distance. The vision showed David in conversation with someone operating at high frequency. The old familiar discomfort rising. The frequency mismatch creating that excruciating feeling. And the automatic impulse to create distance. To criticize. To withdraw. To control. Anything to escape the pain of proximity to light when operating in darkness. This is the moment, as Uriel transmitted with intensity. This is where 90% fail. Because the impulse to run, to create distance, to fight, is so strong, so automatic, so seemingly justified. But this is where transformation lives. In choosing to stay when everything screams run. The practice is recognition and choice. When you feel yourself creating distance, whether through criticism, judgment, withdrawal, control, any mechanism, you pause. Notice, I'm protecting myself. From what? Usually the answer is, from feeling unworthy in presence of worthiness. From the frequency mismatch that's excruciating. And then, instead of following the protective impulse, you choose vulnerability. You say, aloud or internally, I'm afraid. I feel unworthy. I want to run. But I'm choosing to stay. I'm choosing intimacy over protection. I'm choosing to feel this discomfort instead of creating distance to avoid it. The vision showed David practicing this. In conversation with Maya, feeling inadequate, wanting to deflect with joke or change subject. Pausing. Noticing. I feel like I don't know how to be a good father. I'm afraid you see how much I failed you. I want to hide. Then choosing, but I'm staying. I'm here. I'm feeling this. It won't fix everything instantly, as Uriel clarified. Maya won't suddenly trust you completely because of one moment of vulnerability. But each moment you choose staying over running, you rebuild capacity for intimacy. You reprogram the nervous system. Closeness is safe. Vulnerability is strength. Frequency mismatch is temporary discomfort, not mortal threat. And over time, months of these choices, your frequency rises. Not because you're forcing it, but because you're removing the blockages that kept it low. The fight or flight response to love dissolves. Intimacy becomes possible again. Fourth practice, as Uriel said, and the sphere showed image of hands. Open. Releasing. The practice of communion instead of possession. Releasing the grasping that kills what you love. You've spent your life trying to possess what you adore. Hold it. Keep it. Control it. Make it permanent. Make it safe. Elizabeth's love. You tried to possess it through marriage contract, through creating dependency, through control disguised as care. Your daughter's presence. You tried to possess it through obligation, through guilt, through expectation. Your art. You tried to possess great work through studying, analyzing, copying technique, never trusting your own creative flow. And possession kills everything it touches. Because what's possessed isn't free. And what isn't free isn't alive. And what isn't alive can't be loved, only controlled. The vision demonstrated. Hands clutching rose tightly. The rose crushed in the grip. Then hands opening. Rose free. Rose thriving. The practice is conscious release. Every day, identify one thing you're trying to possess. Person. Outcome. Identity. Belief. Anything you're grasping. And practice physically opening your hands, feeling the grasping energy, and choosing release. Not abandonment. Not giving up. Release. The difference is crucial. Abandonment is rejection. Release is trust. You're not saying I don't care. You're saying I care, and because I care, I release my need to control. David watched the demonstration. Vision David thinking of Maya. Feeling the grasping, she should call more. She should visit. She should forgive me. She should. All the shoots creating energetic hooks, demands, control. Then the practice. Hands physically opening. Feeling the grasping. Speaking aloud, I release my need to control Maya's choices. I release my demand that she meet my expectations. I love her and I set her free. If she chooses closeness, I receive it as gift. If she chooses distance, I honor her sovereignty. And the paradox, as Uriel transmitted, is that what you stop controlling often comes closer. Because it's no longer being crushed. Elizabeth couldn't breathe in your possession. Released, even in death, her frequency can commune with yours freely. Maya can't be genuine daughter under weight of obligation. Released, she may choose genuine relationship. Or not. Either way, you love her by setting her free. Daily practice. Identify grasping. Feel it. Release it. Over months, the habit of possession weakens. The capacity for communion strengthens. Fifth and final practice, as Uriel said, and her energy shifted to something David recognized as joy. The practice of creating instead of consuming. Of being creative force instead of being spectator of others' creativity. The vision showed David's blank canvases. 547 days empty. Not from lack of inspiration. From terror of embodying creative power. You've spent your life admiring great art. Consuming it. Analyzing it. Teaching others to appreciate it. But rarely creating from your own authentic source. Because creating requires claiming, I am creative force. And that claim terrified you because you believed you weren't worthy of making that claim. But creative force isn't something you achieve or earn. It's what you are. The same intelligence that makes galaxies beat your heart. The same creative impulse that painted sunsets flows through your hands. Not metaphor. Literal truth. You are creative force having human experience. Not human trying to become creative. So the practice is daily creation. 15 minutes minimum. Paint. Write. Dance. Sing. Build. Sculpt. Anything that pulls something from void into form. Not to make good art. Not to achieve outcome. To practice being what you are, creative force in action. The mind will resist viciously, as Uriel warned, and the vision showed it. David sitting before canvas, brush in hand, thoughts screaming. You haven't created in 18 months, you can't just start. What if it's terrible? What if you've lost it? What if you never had it? What if people see it and judge? What if? All protective mechanisms to prevent you from claiming power. Because claiming creative power makes you responsible. Makes you powerful. Makes you dangerous to every system built on you believing you're powerless. So you paint anyway. Not listening to the voice. Not waiting for inspiration. Not requiring permission from muse or moment or mood. You sit. You create. Badly at first. Terribly. Probably. But genuinely. From your actual self. Not from technique or training or trying to impress. And after 30 days of this, something shifts. The terror lessens. The flow begins. After 90 days, creating becomes natural again. After 6 months, you remember what you forgot at age 7. You were born to create. Not to consume others' creations. To express your own. As Uriel brought all 5 practices together in the vision. David's daily life transformed. Morning, worthiness practice, hand on heart, breathing, deprogramming. Throughout day, recognition instead of worship, staying instead of running, releasing instead of grasping. Evening, creating instead of consuming. These 5 practices, sustained for 1 year, will transform everything. Not because they're magic. Because they directly address the mechanisms that created the fighting pattern. They heal the wound, raise the frequency, restore capacity for embodiment instead of worship. Your timeline, as Uriel said, and numbers appeared. First 30 days, intense resistance. Every practice feels forced. Mind screams constantly. Want to quit repeatedly. Some days you will. And your specific mission, as Uriel said, her energy intensifying, beyond personal healing. You are meant to reconcile with Maya. Not through grand gesture or apology speech, but through being different. When she feels you've stopped grasping, she may choose closeness. Or not. Either way, you heal the lineage. Your wound passed to her. Your healing frees her from that inheritance. You are meant to create again. Not to prove anything. Not for career or recognition. To embody creative force. The art that emerges will be different from before. Honest in ways your academic work never was. And some will respond to that honesty. Your example of ordinary person reclaiming creativity at 63 gives permission to others. And you are meant to share, when asked. Not to proselytize. Not to recruit. But when people notice your transformation and ask, you share honestly. I was fighting what I loved. I learned to embody instead of worship. Here's what I practice. Simple. Direct. No agenda. And some will try it. And some of those will transform. Ripple effect. But all of this, as Uriel emphasized, depends on you choosing daily practice. I can show you the path. I can provide direct experience to anchor your practice. I can explain the mechanism. But I cannot do the work for you. Sacred free will. You choose. Always. Every day. Every moment. David felt the weight and the gift of it. Responsibility. But also empowerment. Not victim of circumstance. Not broken thing needing external fixing. Wounded human with tools for healing and the choice to use them. Will you return? He asked Azuriel. Probably not physically, she transmitted. Single contact sufficient. But subtle presence remains. During practice, you'll sometimes feel support. Not me doing the work, but witnessing. Encouraging. Holding space. And if you drastically deviate from the path, synchronicities will appear. Cardinals. Repeated numbers. Impossible coincidences. Signs to realign. But mostly, you walk the path alone. As it should be. Because this is your journey of reclaiming your own power. And if I fail? David asked, old fear rising. Failure is choosing not to try, Azuriel said firmly. Everything else is learning. You will backslide. You will resist. You will forget. You will choose protection over vulnerability, worship over embodiment, fighting over flowing. Many times. That's not failure. That's being human. Success is getting up one more time than you fall. Is choosing practice again after breaking practice. Is forgiving yourself and beginning again. And Elizabeth? David asked, the question he'd been holding. You said her frequency is accessible. How? Through your own frequency rising, Azuriel explained gently. Death is transition of form, not extinction of consciousness. Elizabeth's consciousness continues, operating at the frequency she maintained in life. Approximately 520 Hz. When you were operating at 150, the gap was too wide for perception. But as your frequency rises through practice, the gap narrows. At 300, you'll feel occasional presence. At 400, regular communication, not verbal but felt. At 500, constant communion. She's not somewhere else, David. She's in every moment you choose love over fear. Because love is the frequency she is. David felt tears again, but different. Not grief's tears. Hope's tears. The reunion you seek, Azuriel transmitted, isn't in some distant afterlife. It's available now. In this life. Through frequency matching. Through embodying what she embodied. Through becoming love instead of seeking it. Azuriel began to fade, not abruptly, but gradually, like mist dissipating in morning sun. Time on the ship is ending. Dawn comes. Normal life awaits. But nothing will be normal again because now you know. Knowledge brings responsibility. But also possibility. The possibility of healing what seemed unhealable. Of transforming what seemed unchangeable. Of embodying what you've only known how to worship. David Chen. 63 years old. Retired art professor. Widower. Estranged father. Man who fought everything he loved. Beginning now, if you choose, becoming man who embodies everything he recognizes as divine. Not special. Not uniquely gifted. Just ordinary human remembering what ordinary humans forgot. The world needs you. Not as savior. As example. Proof that transformation is possible at any age. After any amount of fighting. For any ordinary person willing to do the work. Will you do the work? And David, feeling the weight of 63 years of fighting and the lightness of possibility simultaneously, answered with the only word possible. Yes. David returned to his house at 4:47 a.m. 5 hours in the ship, though it felt simultaneously like minutes and lifetimes. The workshop looked exactly as he'd left it. Blank canvas. Brushes. Scattered tools. But David was fundamentally altered. Not in visible ways. In ways that lived deeper than sight. He didn't try to sleep. Sleep seemed impossible, unnecessary. Instead, he sat in the wooden chair by the window and began. Hand on heart. Breathing. 5 seconds in. 5 seconds out. The words feeling strange in his mouth. Foreign. Like speaking a language he'd never learned but somehow understood. I am worthy because I am. His mind immediately objected. That's not true. You destroyed your marriage. You failed as a father. You haven't created anything of value in years. You're ordinary. You're flawed. David noticed the thoughts. Recognized them as old programs. Exactly as Azuriel had predicted. Returned attention to breath. To heart. To the statement. I am worthy because I am. Not because of achievement. Because existence itself is worthiness. 20 minutes. The longest 20 minutes of his life. Mind screaming constantly. Body restless. Wanting to quit, to do something productive, to check email, to make coffee, anything to escape the discomfort of sitting with the wound. But he stayed. And when 20 minutes ended, nothing felt different. No dramatic shift. No sense of worthiness flooding his system. Just fatigue and frustration and the quiet thought. This is stupid. This won't work. But he'd promised. So tomorrow morning, he would sit again. Second night, after children were asleep, Maya and David sat on her porch with tea. And Maya asked the question directly. What changed, Dad? You're different. I've never seen you like this. Present. Actually here. What happened? David considered lying. Making something normal sounding. But chose truth. I realized I spent my entire life fighting what I loved. Including you. Including your mother. And I'm learning to stop fighting. Learning to embody what I admire instead of worshipping it from distance. Learning that I'm worthy of connection instead of believing I have to earn it through control. Maya looked at him for a long time. Then said quietly, I've been in therapy for 6 years trying to understand why I sabotage every relationship I'm in. Why I push people away when they get close. And I think I learned it from watching you do it. David felt the pain of that. The wound passed generationally. But also the hope. I'm healing it in myself. Which means you can heal it in yourself. The pattern isn't permanent. It's learned. Which means it can be unlearned. They talked until midnight. Honestly. Without masks. And when David left Portland 2 days later, Maya hugged him and said, come back soon. And not out of obligation. Because I actually want you to. The fighting pattern still activated. But he caught it faster. Chose differently more often. Maya had called 3 times. Initiated contact. Said she was trying some of the practices David had mentioned. The worthiness work. The recognition instead of worship. And Elizabeth's presence was constant now. Not as ghost. As frequency. In quiet moments. During practice. In the choice to love instead of fear. David wasn't healed completely. Wasn't transformed into enlightened being. But something fundamental had shifted. From fighting to flowing. From worship to embodiment. From separation to communion. 90 days. And the journey had just begun. David Chen, now 64, sat on his porch at sunrise, coffee in hand, watching desert come alive with light. Cardinals sang in the juniper tree. Lizards emerged to warm themselves on rocks. Sky shifted from indigo to gold to impossible blue. And David felt what he'd spent 6 decades fighting. Contentment. Not explosive joy. Not dramatic happiness. Just deep, quiet, sustainable peace. The state of being aligned with what is instead of fighting it. 8 months since Azuriel's visit. 243 days of daily practice. Not perfect. Some days he'd forgotten, backslid, chosen protection over vulnerability. But more days he'd remembered, practiced, chosen embodiment over worship. His studio behind him held evidence. 17 paintings created since the encounter. Honest work. Raw. Vulnerable. Nothing like the careful, academic pieces he'd created for 30 years. These paintings bled. These paintings breathed. These paintings were him, not his persona. And 3 days ago, something remarkable. A gallery in Santa Fe, small but respected, had asked to show 8 of them. The owner, a woman named Sarah, had visited his studio after a mutual friend mentioned David was painting again. She'd walked slowly through the work, said nothing for 20 minutes, then turned to David and said, "This is the most honest work I've seen in years. What changed? These are so different from your earlier academic pieces." And David, practicing truth, had said simply, "I stopped trying to create what I thought was worthy. Started creating from what I actually feel. Turns out authenticity is more interesting than competence." Sarah had laughed. Authenticity is terrifying, which is why most artists avoid it. But you're not avoiding it. When can we schedule the show? The opening was set for November. David felt simultaneously excited and terrified. The old fear of exposure, of judgment, of being seen. But choosing it anyway. Choosing vulnerability over protection. Maya had visited twice more. 3-day visits where they'd talked deeply, honestly, working through decades of unspoken pain. She was practicing the 5 shifts herself now. Had reported that her marriage, strained for years, was improving. That she was learning to stay instead of run. "I think you gave me more than broken patterns, Dad," she'd said during the last visit. "You gave me the possibility of healing them. Watching you transform at 64 gives me hope that I can transform at 38. The grandchildren knew David now. Called him weekly on video chat. Emma had started drawing, showing him her pictures, asking his opinion. David had learned to appreciate without evaluating. To encourage without controlling. And Elizabeth. Elizabeth was constant presence now. Not as visual apparition. Not as audible voice. But as frequency. As the state of love he accessed through practice. He understood now what Azuriel had meant. Elizabeth hadn't gone anywhere. His low frequency had made her presence imperceptible. As his frequency rose, the veil thinned. And some mornings, like this one, sitting on the porch watching sunrise, David could feel her so clearly it was almost like she sat beside him. Not the Elizabeth of body and form. The Elizabeth of essence. Pure love. Unconditional acceptance. Creative force. All the things he'd adored in her that were actually reflections of what he'd buried in himself. "I'm becoming what I worshipped in you," he said aloud to the desert, to the sunrise, to her presence. "And in becoming it, I understand what you tried to tell me. We were never separate. Just operating at different frequencies. And the gap I created through worship is finally closing through embodiment." He felt response. Not words, but impression. Warmth. Approval. Joy. And the clear sense, "You're remembering, David. Keep remembering." His phone buzzed. Text from his neighbor, Thomas, 71, who'd noticed David's transformation and asked questions. David had shared the practices without agenda, and Thomas had started trying them. The text read, "Morning practice completed. 35 days now. Wife said I'm different. More present. Less angry. Whatever you told me is working. Coffee this week." David smiled. Ripple effect. Exactly as Azuriel had described. Individual transformation radiating outward. Not through preaching. Through example. Through being different and, when asked, sharing what made the difference. He replied, Wednesday, 10 a.m. My place. Bring your questions. The art professor in him wanted to create curriculum. Systematic teaching. Formal structure. But the embodied human in him knew better. Share when asked. Live the transformation. Let authenticity be the teaching. The sun cleared the mountains fully now, flooding the desert with light. David finished his coffee, stood, stretched his 64-year-old body that felt paradoxically younger than it had at 63. Less pain. More vitality. The somatic result of frequency rising. He walked to his studio, sat before blank canvas, and began his daily creation practice. No plan. No technique. No trying to make good art. Just expressing what wanted to emerge. And what emerged, stroke by stroke, was light pushing through darkness. Not defeating darkness. Not eliminating it. But penetrating it. Coexisting with it. Both necessary. Both real. The human journey. From darkness of forgetting to light of remembering. Not transcending the darkness but illuminating it. Not fighting the wound but healing it through embodiment of what was always true beneath the programming. Worthy. Divine. Creative. Whole. Not achieved. Remembered. David painted for 2 hours, lost in flow state, and when he finally stepped back, he saw it clearly. His own face. Half in shadow. Half in light. Both real. Both David. The David who'd fought what he loved. And the David who was learning to embody it. Not two separate people. One person healing. One person transforming. One person remembering. And in that moment, David understood what Azuriel had given him. Not salvation. Not external fixing. But mirror. Reflection. Permission to see what had always been true. I'm not broken, he said aloud. The first time the words felt completely honest. I was wounded. And wounds heal. Are healing. Will continue healing. He heard the difference between those statements and the affirmations he'd tried for years. Affirmations as desperate convincing, I am healed, when he clearly wasn't. This was honest assessment. I am healing, which was demonstrably true. The difference between wishful thinking and embodied truth. David cleaned his brushes, documented the painting with his phone, added it to the folder he'd send the gallery. 17 paintings. 17 honest expressions. The show would reveal him completely. No masks. No pretense. Just David as he actually was. Terrifying. And necessary. Because hiding behind competence, behind academic credentials, behind persona had been the ultimate worship. Placing the acceptable version of himself on pedestal while rejecting the authentic version as unworthy. No more. The show would be titled Embodiment. Unlearning Worship. Let people judge. Let critics analyze. Let the art world accept or reject. He would stand in his truth. Vulnerable. Seen. Real. And that, David understood, was the practice made manifest. Not just sitting with hand on heart, but living the embodied state in public. Creating from authenticity in gallery. Being seen in vulnerability. The ultimate test of whether he'd actually transformed or just thought about transforming. November would tell. But today, David knew one thing with cellular certainty. He was no longer fighting what he adored. He was becoming it. And David, telling this story now, 8 months after Azuriel's visit, 243 days into daily practice, wants you to understand something crucial. This is not just his story. This is the human story. The story of fighting what we adore because we believe we're unworthy of it. The story of worshipping externally what we've rejected internally. The story of creating distance from love because frequency mismatch makes proximity excruciating. And if you've listened this far, if you've stayed present through David's journey, it's probably because you recognize the pattern in yourself. Not identical, but similar. Where are you fighting what you adore? Look honestly. Not to judge yourself, but to see clearly. Do you love your partner but create distance through criticism, control, or emotional unavailability? Do you adore nature but feel powerless to protect it, numb to its destruction? Do you seek truth but resist uncomfortable revelations about yourself, your beliefs, your programming? Do you long for freedom but stay in familiar prisons of thought, behavior, relationship? Do you want authenticity but wear acceptable masks because real self feels too vulnerable? Do you seek God, source, divine but reject the premise that divinity lives in you? Do you crave presence but live constantly in past regret or future anxiety? These aren't character flaws. They are symptoms. Symptoms of the unworthiness wound. The belief, programmed across generations, systematically installed through religion, education, parenting, social conditioning, that you are fundamentally not enough. Not worthy of unconditional love. Not worthy of freedom. Not worthy of your own creative power. Not worthy of embodying what you adore. And that belief creates frequency mismatch. What you adore operates at, say, 500 Hz. You, carrying unworthiness, operate at 150 Hz. The gap creates cognitive dissonance, emotional pain, psychological conflict. So you fight. Not because you want to destroy what you love, but because proximity hurts. Because staying close to high frequency when operating at low frequency is excruciating. Because matching that frequency requires dissolving the beliefs you've built your entire identity around. And dissolution feels like death. Even when it's death of false self. Even when it's liberation. The ego fights to survive. And the ego's survival depends on keeping you at low frequency. Dependent. Controllable. Believing you need external salvation. But here's what Azuriel revealed to David. And what David is revealing to you. The belief is false. You were never unworthy. You were programmed to believe you were. And programming can be dissolved. Not through more worship. Not through more seeking external validation. But through embodiment. Through recognizing that what you adore in others is reflection of what you've disowned in yourself. Through reclaiming it. Through becoming it. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not toxic positivity. This is not denying real wounds or pretending pain doesn't exist. This is facing the wound. Feeling it fully. Understanding its mechanism. And healing it through conscious practice that directly addresses the root cause. Azuriel told David that 73% of humanity currently operates in fighting pattern. You're not alone. You're not uniquely broken. You're wounded in the way most humans are wounded. Which means the tools that heal David can heal you. The 5 practices he learned aren't David's exclusive path. They're human path. Universal accessibility. Not reserved for spiritual elite. Available to anyone willing to do the work. Recognition instead of worship. When you encounter something that triggers adoration, pause. Ask, what quality am I recognizing? Where have I rejected this in myself? How can I embody it today? Worthiness practice. 20 minutes daily. Hand on heart. Breathing. I am worthy because I am. Not because of achievement. Because existence itself is worthiness. Let nervous system integrate new baseline. Staying instead of running. When proximity to love creates discomfort, when impulse to create distance rises, choose vulnerability. I'm afraid. I feel unworthy. I want to run. But I'm staying. Releasing instead of grasping. Daily identify what you're trying to possess. Person, outcome, identity, and practice conscious release. Not abandonment. Trust. Setting free what you love. Creating instead of consuming. 15 minutes daily. Create something from nothing. Not to make good art. To embody creative force. To remember, you are creator, not spectator. Simple practices. Not easy. Because they require facing what you've spent lifetime avoiding. The wound. The belief in unworthiness. The programming that keeps you fighting what you love. But simple. Accessible. Effective if sustained. David at 64, after 63 years of fighting patterns, after failed marriage, estranged daughter, 18 months of creative paralysis, transformed in 8 months of consistent practice. Not completely. Not perfectly. But measurably. Genuinely. From fighting to flowing. From worship to embodiment. From separation to communion. If David can do it, you can. Not because David is special. Because the practices work. Because the wound isn't ultimate truth. Because remembering is possible at any age. The question isn't whether you can transform. The question is whether you will. Whether you'll choose daily practice even when it feels pointless. Whether you'll stay with discomfort even when running feels safer. Whether you'll embody instead of worship even when worship feels more comfortable. The choice is yours. It always has been. Azuriel can't make it for you. David can't make it for you. These words can't make it for you. But if you're recognizing the pattern deeply, if you feel the wound Azuriel described, if you're ready for transformation that goes beyond surface practice to fundamental essence shift, there are resources that can support your journey. The book Reconnecting with Your Divine Essence is for those ready to look inward instead of searching outside. Discovering that all the answers, all the power, all the wisdom already reside within you, waiting to be accessed. Reconnecting with forgotten divine essence, an eternal core beyond temporary identities, traumas, and conditioning that obscure who you truly are. Breaking through the veil of illusion that separates you from your truth. Dissolving layers of programming that made you forget your divine nature. Establishing a direct connection with the Creator, not through intermediaries or external dogmas, but through the divinity that has always existed within. Dissolving deeply ingrained limiting beliefs, especially unworthiness, that keep you small, dependent, disconnected from your unlimited inner potential. The link is in the first comment pinned below this video. And for those recognizing this isn't just information you need but transformation, personal work, individual attention, we offer private sessions with spiritual therapists trained in awakening processes, deep healing, reconnect ion with your true essence. This is not conventional therapy. This is not generic advice. This is work specifically directed to where you are stuck, blocked, fragmented, or lost. Sessions are individual via video call. An hour and a half of undivided attention dedicated to facilitating your unique process. We don't sell ready-made formulas. We work with what your soul needs now. Some need a one-off session. Others need follow-up for months. Every journey is different. But be honest with yourself before making contact. This isn't for those seeking quick magical solutions. It's for those genuinely ready for deep inner work. For those who recognize that real change requires commitment not just to the session but to the process that continues between sessions. For those who want to go beyond watching videos and are ready to live transformation. If this is you, the email address is in the description. And if you're not already subscribed, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Every week we share stories that awaken forgotten memories, dissolve comfortable illusions, and point the way back to who you've always been beneath layers of conditioning. We don't preach absolute truths. We share experiences that resonate with those ready to listen. Leave a comment. Are you recognizing the pattern of fighting what you adore? Where in your life are you creating distance from what you love most? Your experience matters. If something in this story resonated deeply, sparked questions, or brought recognition, please share it. Your voice might be exactly what someone needs to read today. And if these stories resonate with you, there are two ways to contribute. Becoming a channel member, a recurring monthly support like a subscription. You can find the Become a Member button below the video. Or through Super Thanks, a one-time contribution of whatever amount you feel is appropriate, left directly here in the comments via the heart icon with a $sign. Both options exist for those who value the work and want it to continue. David Chen hasn't become enlightened master. He hasn't achieved perfection. He still struggles, still backslides, still faces the wound. But he's not fighting what he adores anymore. When he looks at Maya, he doesn't worship her from distance. He recognizes shared divinity, intimacy without control. When he creates art, he doesn't adore impossible standards. He embodies creative force, expression without judgment. When he remembers Elizabeth, he doesn't fight the love or the loss. He communes with frequency that transcends form, connection without grasping. The transformation isn't dramatic. It's fundamental. From fighting to flowing. From worship to embodiment. From separation to communion. Azuriel's question, why do humans fight what they adore? Has answer now. Not because you hate what you love. Because you believe you're unworthy of it. And that belief creates frequency mismatch that makes proximity excruciating. So you fight to create survivable distance. But the belief is false. You were never unworthy. You were programmed to believe you were. And programming can be dissolved. Not through more adoration. Through embodiment. Becoming what you've only admired from distance. The alien queen didn't come to save humanity. She came to show you that you can save yourselves. Not through worship of external gods or gurus or systems. Through recognition of what you've always been beneath the wound. Divine. Worthy. Whole. Not broken children needing fixing. Temporarily sleeping gods needing remembering. And the remembering begins when you stop fighting what you adore and start becoming it. You are not here by chance. Something in this story was meant for you. Specifically for you. Perhaps the confirmation you were looking for. Perhaps the calling you finally heard. Or perhaps just the seed planted today that will germinate tomorrow. It doesn't matter what happened. What matters is that you made it this far. And that means you're ready. Ready to stop fighting. Ready to start embodying. Ready to remember who you've always been beneath the programming that made you forget. The path is simple. The practices are clear. The choice is yours. And the time is now. Not someday when you're worthy. Now. Because you already are. You just forgot. And everything, every story, every practice, every moment of this journey is invitation to remember. Stop fighting what you adore. Start becoming it. That's all. Until the next story.